Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fundamental, something we all handle nearly every day, but maybe don't think about its journey. Money. Specifically, paper money.
That's right. We've looked at some fascinating sources, and the story of how we went from coins to paper is, well, it's quite something.
We've talked before about moving past barter, trading goods directly to using precious metals, stamped coins. That was a huge leap.
Huge. Made trade much simpler for a while.
But then empires got bigger, trade routes got longer, and suddenly carrying sacks of gold or silver, well, it wasn't just heavy.
It was dangerous and incredibly impractical for large-scale commerce. Imagine paying for an army or a fleet of ships with coins.
Exactly. So humanity needed another leap. And this one was maybe even more abstract, believing in a simple piece of paper.
Paper with a promise. That's the core of it, isn't it?
It really is. It's a story about emperors, merchants, trust, and yeah, just belief.
And that's what we're going to unpack. How did paper money start? Why did it catch on? And what does that history tell us about the money we use now? We've pulled together the key insights from the materials you've shared.
Okay, so the beginning. Where does this wild idea of paper representing value actually emerge? I think many people might assume it started in Europe.
That's the common thought, yeah. But the sources point clearly much earlier to China. We're talking around the 7th century CE, the Tang Dynasty. Europe was still very much focused on metal coins then.
China was already this economic powerhouse, right? Huge trade networks.
Massive. And that scale created a very real problem. Think about merchants moving silk, tea, porcelain, huge quantities, long distances.
Right, and needing to pay for it all.
Exactly. You might need, say, 1,000 copper coins, maybe more, for a big purchase like horses. But the weight of those coins alone was enormous.
More than the horses themselves, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And incredibly risky to transport. You're basically advertising wealth to bandits.
So out of this necessity, they got creative.
They really did. Merchants started leaving their heavy coins, their hard cash, with trusted agents or even government offices.
Ah, like an early bank deposit?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And in return, they got a piece of paper, a note, basically saying, this piece of paper is worth X amount of coins held here.
A promissory note.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And crucially, these notes started changing hands. People began accepting the paper itself as payment, trusting they could redeem it for coin if needed. But it wasn't official money yet, not quite.
Okay, so that was the seed. When did it become, official?
That big step happened during the Song Dynasty, around the 11th century. The government saw how useful these private notes were and decided to take over.
They started printing their own.
Yes, and crucially, they backed it with state authority. They issued the world's first actual government-backed paper currency. It's called Jiaozi.
Jiaozi, okay. So that's the official birth certificate, basically.
That's the moment. The government saying, this paper is money. They even mandated its acceptance for things like taxes.
Which forces people to use it, right?
Absolutely. That state backing, that decree, was the game changer.
So why China? Why did it happen there, centuries before anywhere else? What was the secret sauce?
It seems like a convergence of things, really. First, they had the tech. China was way ahead with printing, woodblock printing, then movable type. They could actually produce these notes in large quantities.
Something Europe couldn't do easily back then.
Yeah, not on the same scale, no. Second, a strong central government. The emperor's authority was immense. If the emperor decreed this paper was money, people generally accepted it. There was trust in that authority, backed by force if needed.
Okay, tech and authority. What else?
The sheer size and dynamism of their economy. The Silk Road, internal markets. They just needed something lighter and more portable than coins to keep things moving efficiently. The demand was there.
It makes sense. The need drove the innovation, and they had the means to implement it.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, they even thought about security back then.
Already, like anti-counterfeiting.
Yeah. Using different inks, special paper, official seals, multiple signatures, features we still see on banknotes today. They understood right away that trust could be undermined by fakes.
That's incredible foresight. And these weren't just temporary IOUs.
No, some of these notes were designed to be valid for several years. It was a sophisticated system.
Okay, so China's humming along with paper money in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. Meanwhile, Europe is still clinking coins. How does the idea even cross over?
Well, slowly, and with a lot of skepticism, enter Marco Polo.
Ah, the famous traveler, late 1200s.
That's him. He travels from Venice, makes it all the way to Kublai Khan's court in China, and he sees this system in action.
And he must have been stunned.
Completely. Imagine coming from a world of gold and silver and seeing people happily trading pieces of paper made from, like, tree bark because the emperor put his seal on it.
What happened when he went back and told people in Europe?
They basically didn't believe him. They thought it sounded like alchemy or magic, money from trees. It seemed absurd.
They couldn't grasp value without substance.
Exactly. Marco Polo stressed the emperor's power, refused the notes, and you faced severe punishment. But still, the core idea of paper itself being money was just too alien for most Europeans at the time.
But the story stuck around, presumably. Planted a seed, maybe?
It definitely planted a seed. His accounts, even if met with disbelief, put the idea out there, but it took centuries for Europe to really grapple with it.
Right, so we jump forward quite a bit, huh? To the 1600s, that's like 300, 400 years later. What finally clicked in Europe?
It evolved differently there. It wasn't an imperial decree initially. It started more organically with goldsmiths and the very first banks, especially in places like Sweden and then England.
Goldsmiths, how did they get involved?
Well, people would deposit their gold and silver with goldsmiths for safekeeping because they had vaults. The goldsmith would issue a receipt.
Ah, like the early Chinese merchants, but with goldsmiths instead of government agents.
Pretty much. And just like in China, people realized it was easier to just trade the receipts directly instead of constantly lugging metal around.
So the receipts started acting like money.
Exactly. The key thing, the absolute bedrock, was the goldsmiths or the bank's promise. You bring this paper back, we will give you your gold or silver. That promise was everything. That built the trust.
And then, presumably, government saw this working and thought, hey, we should get in on this.
That's the pattern again, yeah. Just like in China, centuries before, governments gradually took over the issuance of banknotes, recognizing the efficiency and control it offered.
Okay, so paper money starts circulating more widely in Europe, backed by this promise of gold or silver. But how do you make that promise feel solid, especially across borders?
That's where the gold standard comes in.
Yeah.
It became the dominant system for a long time.
Right. The idea being every banknote corresponds to actual gold held by the government.
That was the theory, yes. For every pound note or dollar note or franc note, there was supposed to be a specific amount of gold sitting in the national treasury. You could, in principle, exchange your paper for physical gold.
Which must have boosted confidence quite a bit. Made international trade easier too, I imagine.
It did, for a while. It created a sense of stability and fixed exchange rates. People felt the paper was real because it was tied to gold, something universally valued.
But it didn't last forever. What went wrong? Why did we move away from it?
Well, reality intervened. Wars are expensive. Governments needed more money than they had gold to back it. Economic booms and busts put pressure on reserves.
Right. You can't just magic up more gold when the economy needs stimulus or you need to fund a war effort.
Exactly. The system was rigid, and major crises, particularly the Great Depression in the 1930s and then the cost of World War II, really exposed its weaknesses. Countries needed more flexibility to manage their economy.
So they started breaking the link.
They had to. Gradually, throughout the 20th century, most countries abandoned the gold standard. It was a huge shift, leading us to the system we have almost everywhere today.
Which is fiat money.
Fiat money.
Let's unpack that term. Fiat, from Latin, right? Let it be done, like a decree.
Precisely. Fiat money has no intrinsic value, like gold coins did. And crucially, it's not backed by or convertible into anything physical like gold anymore.
So why is it worth anything? Just because the government says so?
That's a huge part of it. The government declares it legal tender, meaning it must be accepted for payments and debts.
Yeah.
But the other essential ingredient is just us, our collective belief.
Trust again.
It all comes back to trust. We accept it as payment because we trust that others will accept it from us tomorrow. It's valued by social convention, backed by state authority.
And that trust is powerful, but also potentially fragile.
Extremely. If people lose faith in the government or the economy, say, during hyperinflation or political collapse, that trust can evaporate and the fiat currency can become virtually worthless overnight.
Because there's nothing real underpinning it anymore except belief.
Exactly. But when the trust holds, fiat money is incredibly useful.
What are the main advantages that made countries switch?
Well, it's lightweight, portable, obviously better than metal. It's easy to produce in needed quantities. But the big one is flexibility.
Governments can control the supply.
Yes, they can print more money or take it out of circulation to manage economic growth, inflation, unemployment tools they just didn't have under the rigid gold standard. It allows for active monetary policy.
And this move from physical backing to pure trust, It sort of laid the groundwork for everything digital, didn't it? Checks, cards, online payments.
Absolutely. Once you accept that an abstract promise or decree has value, moving that promise from paper to electronic signals isn't such a huge conceptual leap. Paper money was the bridge to digital finance.
But we should touch on the downsides, too. This reliance on trust and government control isn't foolproof. You mentioned hyperinflation.
Right, it's the Achilles heel of fiat money. When governments get it wrong or abuse the power to print money, the results can be catastrophic.
Weimar Germany in the 1920s is the classic example, isn't it?
A terrifying one. People literally needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy basic groceries because the money was losing value almost by the hour.
And more recently, Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, in the late 2000s, saw inflation rates in the billions, even trillions of percent. They were printing notes with denominations in the trillions, and they were still essentially worthless.
What's the basic cause in those situations? Just printing too much?
Fundamentally, yes. Printing money wildly out of step with the actual productive capacity of the economy. Too much money chasing too few goods erodes trust and sends prices spiraling. It's a stark reminder that paper or digital money only works if managed responsibly.
So that brings us pretty much to today. We still have banknotes and coins, but increasingly they feel like backups.
Yeah, they're fading into the background for many of us, aren't they? We tap our cards, our phones, use apps, Google Pay, Apple Pay, Paytm, UPI, depending where you are in the world. Physical cash is becoming less common in daily transactions.
But the underlying system is still mostly fiat, right? Even if it's digital.
For the most part, yes. Those digital balances still represent pounds, dollars, euros, rupees, fiat currencies issued by central banks. The form has changed again, from metal to paper to digital bits, but the fundamental principle of government-backed, trust-based value often remains.
Often remains, which hints at the next chapter.
Exactly. Because now we're seeing the rise of things like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others. These are aiming for a different model entirely.
Money without governments, without central banks, maybe even without borders in the same way. Definitely without paper.
It's a whole new phase in this constantly evolving story of what money is and how it works.
It really makes you think. So the next time you actually handle a physical banknote, if you even do, take a second look.
Yeah, it's not just ink on paper or polymer.
It's like 1,000 years of history in your hand. From those first Chinese notes, through Marco Polo's skepticism, European goldsmiths, the gold standard's rise and fall, all leading to this thing you might use to buy coffee.
All built on that incredible, powerful, sometimes fragile thing. Collective belief? Trust.
It really is a story that's still unfolding. Technology keeps changing, our ideas about value keep changing.
And trust remains at the heart of it. What we trust, how we trust, that's what will shape the future of money.
An ongoing journey, for sure. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Keep questioning, keep exploring. We'll catch you on the next dive.